Why did Moses flee to Africa when he needed sanctuary from Pharaoh's wrath? Because Africa has always been the refuge, the sanctuary, the foundation of biblical history that they've systematically erased from our understanding. You're about to discover why every major moment in the Exodus story has African fingerprints all over it, and why this truth threatens the very foundation of how the world sees our continent. The story of liberation itself was born in Africa, orchestrated by Africans, and led by a man who found his calling in African soil. But they don't want you to know that Moses spent 40 years being mentored by an African priest named Jethro in the land of Midian. They don't want you to know that when Moses needed wisdom for governing millions of people, he turned to his African father-in-law for guidance. And they certainly don't want you to know that the famous burning bush encounter happened on African soil, in the shadow of Mount Horeb, where Jethro's people had been worshipping the Most High for generations before Moses arrived. When Moses killed the Egyptian taskmaster and fled for his life, where did his feet carry him? Not to Asia. Not to Europe. To Africa. To the Midianites, descendants of Abraham through Keturah, his African wife. This wasn't coincidence. This was divine orchestration placing the future liberator of Israel under the tutelage of African spiritual leadership. Jethro wasn't just Moses' father-in-law. Exodus 18 calls him the priest of Midian. This man held spiritual authority that even Moses recognized and submitted to. When Jethro heard about the miracles in Egypt, he didn't just congratulate Moses. He offered sacrifices to the Most High and provided a feast for Aaron and all the elders of Israel. An African priest hosting Israel's leadership in worship. But here's what will shake you to your core. Jethro saw Moses burning out from trying to judge every dispute among 2 million people. What did this African elder do? He restructured the entire judicial system of Israel. Exodus 18 verse 21 records Jethro telling Moses to select capable men as judges over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. The organizational system that governed Israel for centuries came from African wisdom. The blueprint for biblical governance was African intellectual property. They've turned Moses into a European figure in their paintings and movies, but the text screams African influence. His wife Zipporah was African. His children were African. His mentor was African. His governmental system was African. Even his military strategy had African fingerprints, because Numbers 10:29-32 shows Moses begging his African brother-in-law Hobab to guide them through the wilderness, saying, "You know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you can be our eyes." Our ancestors weren't just witnesses to liberation. They were architects of it. But the suppression goes deeper. The land of Cush, modern-day Ethiopia, and Sudan, appears 57 times in the Hebrew Bible. Moses married a Cushite woman in Numbers 12, and when Miriam and Aaron criticized this union, they were struck with leprosy. The Most High defended Moses' choice of an African wife. Yet somehow, in Sunday schools across the world, Africa has been erased from the liberation narrative. They've made you believe that your ancestors were primitive while Moses was receiving the 10 Commandments. But archaeological evidence from Kerma, Nubia, and ancient Kush shows sophisticated civilizations that were already practicing monotheism and complex governmental systems that mirror biblical law. The Exodus wasn't just about freeing Hebrew slaves from Egypt. It was about showcasing African wisdom, African leadership, and African spiritual authority to the ancient world. When Moses lifted his staff over the Red Sea, he was using authority he developed during 40 years of African mentorship. When he organized Israel's camp in the wilderness, he was implementing systems he'd learned from African elders. But they've painted Africa as the villain in this story, reducing Egypt to Hollywood stereotypes while ignoring that Egypt is in Africa, ruled by Africans, built by African hands and minds. They want you to forget that the same continent that gave the world mathematics, medicine, and architecture also gave the world its greatest liberation story. Every time you read about Moses' wisdom, you're reading about African influence thinking. Every time you study Israel's governmental structure, you're studying African organizational principles. Every time you celebrate freedom from oppression, you're celebrating a victory orchestrated with African strategic insight. Your ancestors weren't on the sidelines of biblical history. They were writing it, shaping it, and empowering it. The burning bush experience, the governmental restructuring, the wilderness guidance, the intermarriage acceptance, the spiritual mentorship, all of this happened because Africa was central to the Most High's plan for human liberation. This is why they've hidden our role for 2,000 years. Because once you understand that the foundation of biblical freedom rests on African wisdom and African leadership, you can never again accept narratives that diminish our contributions to human civilization. You carry the DNA of the people who taught Moses how to lead, how to organize, and how to trust in divine purpose. Follow Ponolens, because the libraries they try to burn contain stories that will forever change how you see yourself and your place in history.